Well, good morning. The presentation will be in English, I'm afraid. My French, my Flemish, my Dutch are not so good. As the name and the accent already give me away, you know I'm an American because only Americans are called Rusty. But I am based in London. I've been in the UK for more than 20 years at this point. So I feel more at home in Europe than I do in the United States, especially in the current political climate. So it's good to be with you. So thanks to Veronique, thanks to Julie and Ektito and Rock and all of you. It's good to be with you today. So as Lean said, I'm going to talk to you about customer obsession. And for me, the path to customer obsession is all about putting yourself in the customer's shoes and understanding customer context. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about context and obsession as we go through the presentation. Now, we're all consumers here in the room, so we know that we're always addressable. And Forrester does a lot of research. So we have interviewed between 50 and 60,000 adults over the age of 18 for the last several years. And in 2011, we started this particular survey, and we asked people only 3 questions. Do you connect to the internet multiple times a day? Do you do that using multiple devices? And do you connect when you're away from home or the office? And when we first started this in 2011, that number was about 50% of adults, and it's now approaching 75% of adults who are always addressable. And we know this because as consumers, we're always connected, which gives us new power. We have access to information and goods and services, and truly the world is our marketplace these days. But we've also changed as consumers. We've become more value-driven. So price alone isn't always the most important factor. We all like to get a good deal, but if we have the money to spend, we will just as soon go for something that provides better value or a better experience. We've also gotten more savvy with using our digital devices. We like to refer to that as hyper-adoption at Forrester. We're more willing to try new things, and that's happening more quickly. But with hyper-adoption comes hyper-abandonment. We will quickly walk away from something that no longer interests us. And if you want a good example of that, you don't have to raise your hand, but just think about how many of you used to play Angry Birds. Do you still play Angry Birds? Do you miss it? The answer is probably no. Or I'll give you more of a business example. I will admit, and I apologize to Barbara, but I could follow the slides, but I couldn't follow the words. And I was trying to check in for my flight this afternoon back to London. And I went to the British Airways app because I have their app. And guess what? The travel agent had not put my executive club number in. So the app didn't have my flight, so it pointed me to the website. So I go to the website where I could put in the number, and then I go back to the app, and the app still can't find the flight. So I try to check in online instead of using the app. And of course, I'm in a middle seat, and it wants 11 pounds to move me to an aisle seat instead of a middle seat. But it wants a credit card number because that's stored with the app, but it's not stored online. And I don't have my credit card with me because it's downstairs in my bag. So long story short, I'm sitting in a middle seat back to London tonight, even though the airplane is only half full, just because British Airways couldn't make their app and their website talk to each other. That is a very frustrating occurrence, and I'm sure you could think of other examples. Also, in this new world where we're connected and empowered, we're no longer willing to believe what a firm tells us in its advertising. And I'll give you a British example here. If I travel for 45 minutes on the public transport system in London, I will be exposed to at least 130 ads representing close to 100 different products. By the end of the day, if I take that plus all the other media I'm exposed to, it's over 3,500 different advertising messages. And maybe it's because I'm nearly as old as Jonathan's mother, but I can't keep up with all of those messages. And in fact, the human brain just can't process all of that information, and we disregard it. That leads me to this, and you've probably seen this before. There have been lots of studies about the human attention span, and this particular one has also been debunked because people say, but our attention span isn't getting shorter. How can you say it's less than that of a goldfish? Because of all of our devices, we actually are better at multitasking. And that's true. But if you go back to this original study, it has one key word that most people miss, and that is our visual attention span. So after 8 seconds, our mind starts to wander, or we will be distracted by something else that pops up on the screen. So we're better at multitasking. We will still spend 20 minutes or so to complete a task from start to finish, but every 8 seconds or so, we get distracted. So all of this information, all of these things flying at people might sound good on the surface, but it's really hard to reach the consumer and connect with the consumer in a meaningful way. That's why we suggest that you embrace customer context, and customer context is something that we think is an imperative. It's one of the things that we talk about at Forrester as being something that marketers need to start thinking about now. So to give you a little more definition of context, it's all about putting yourself in the customer's shoes, like I mentioned earlier, and becoming obsessed with delivering value to the customer. Because we really believe that customers are looking for that value exchange. They're looking for something that makes their lives easier. And so you might be able to put a clever ad out, and you might get some immediate attention. You might get some conversions because of that ad, but it won't be sustainable. It won't work over time because that gimmick is something clever, but it might not hold the attention for a long period of time and become something useful. So you have to think about how to make your marketing programs useful, and not just once, but continuously across the customer life cycle. And I'm going to give you some customer examples in a little while that will look at how some people have been trying to do that. The long and the short of context is you want to avoid this particular situation. And it was cut off here, so I had to look to make sure you could see the WTF at the top. And you probably think this is just my idea of being clever. Well, it is. But I actually took this photograph. It's not something that I borrowed from the website, right? I went to a customer in Ireland, one of our banking customers in Ireland. And on the floor where marketing sits, all of the conference rooms have these big posters on the door. If you look closely, you can see that there's a doorknob here beside this young man's chin. So on all of the doors, on all of the conference rooms where marketing sits are these big posters, and all of them reflect a customer moment. And they're trying to make sure everyone in the organization, not just marketing, but everyone understands that there is a customer at the other end of these transactions or these interactions, and we have to focus on the outcome. And in this particular case, it's a shocking moment that we want to avoid with the customer. The funny story about this is the top executive of the bank was walking around for about 3 months before he understood what this meant. For 3 months, he thought it simply meant, why the face? And then someone finally let him in on the joke. But seriously, you probably think that everything I've just said sounds great at a high level, but how do you get there? Because you can't throw away everything you're doing today. You can't just stop sending out your campaigns. And you're right. Email, direct mail, the way we do outreach to our customers will continue to be an important part of our marketing activities. But those campaigns do need to evolve. We think that they need to become more consistent, so that when you're sending things out, they're consistent with what happens when the customer initiates the interaction on an inbound channel. We think that you need to be more relevant to the customer's context and what's going on with him or her in that moment. And then finally, of course, they need to be more engaging, because if you're only going to be able to hold that attention span for about 8 seconds until something distracts them, you have to engage them for the first 8 seconds, the next 8 seconds, and keep them interested in what you have to say. Now, I do a lot of work with vendors, but I also do a lot of work with end users like yourselves. And in particular, every year I work on an evaluation of campaign management vendors and enterprise marketing vendors. And when we do that, we interview a lot of end user clients. And those end user clients come back with their challenges. So in the last 12 months, there were 3 big challenges that people came to me with. And one, with 46% of the people giving me this challenge, was integrating the online and the offline. For example, here's a US retailer who says the big problem is trying to coordinate the e-commerce activities, the store activities, and the outbound campaign activities. This one comes up from people across different verticals. And online and offline can mean different things to different people. If you're in the advertising world, even email is considered offline. So it means different things to different people. But really what it comes down to is being able to have that consistent view across these channels. The second biggest challenge that people have raised with me, with 48% of the people saying this, is transforming marketing for real time. Now, this is not just a technology problem. It's an organizational problem. As we can see here in this banking example, a lot of the interactions that occur in some cases are not owned by marketing. They're owned by the customer services person or the salesperson or by an operational system. So you have to coordinate across business functions to address real-time interactions as much as you have to invest in the technology that would enable you to do that. And then finally, one that probably all of you are struggling with right now, the biggest challenge with nearly half of the people identifying it is understanding cross-device behavior. Getting back to that thing I mentioned at the beginning, where we're always addressable, we're always connected, and cross-device identity resolution, or understanding that it's the same person on the phone, on the tablet, on the computer, wherever they might be, becomes a real challenge. And what we're finding is that this, when it first started to come up, lots of people were throwing technology at the problem because they wanted to make sure that if it was the same person on these different devices, they could make sure they put the same ad in front of you, or they could make sure that they got you to convert on at least one of the channels. And we're seeing that that is just not why consumers engage on different devices. They're not always wanting you to just sell to them. And this example from Asia here happens to be L'Oreal in Asia, looking at the fact that in a mobile-driven culture like they have in Singapore and Malaysia and Hong Kong, they have a great mobile app, and you can buy stuff on the app, but they really want to use the mobile to build the affinity with the consumers that the brand will maintain. So it becomes a very different exercise than just placing an ad or trying to get someone to click and make a purchase. So what do you do if you're trying to solve these 3 big problems? You want to combine the online and offline. You want to transform what you're doing to be more real time, and you want to identify your customers across devices. Well, we believe that there are lots of different types of technology you might use, but we put them into 2 big categories for marketing. Systems of insight, which happen to be a lot of the things Jonathan talked to you about. It's your data, it's your analytics, and it's the insights that you would derive from all of that data. And then it's systems of engagement, which Barbara talked a lot about, where you are going to use that data and analytics to help you develop the right content so that it can feed into your marketing automation systems and it can drive the interactions with the customers. Now, when you start looking at systems of insight and systems of engagement, we think there are some key areas you need to focus on. Some of these are addressing those challenges that we were talking about. So you need to address real time. You need to address identity resolution. You need to address that understanding of the customer across the journey with data and analytics, what we call journey intelligence. You need to interact with the customer across a lot of different channels based on the customer's preference. And of course, you need to do that continuously. So I'm going to switch gears here for the next few minutes and give you some customer examples so that you can see how some different organizations have approached these 5 different applications of technology. So in every case, I'll give you a before customer context and an after customer context, and we'll talk about what the organization did that was different. So we'll start with Walt Disney. And we all know Walt Disney Parks and Resorts, and they put these great ads on television, and they appeal to the kids, and they appeal to the adults, and they're very emotional. And Disney will continue to invest a lot in its media advertising because whether it's television, whether it's print, that is going to be a big spend for Disney to attract people. But Disney is more focused now on what happens in the moment. You know, Jonathan talked about Google and their moment of truth. With Walt Disney, it's about customer moments. And they have this magic band that you wear in the park. And don't worry, I'm not going to talk to you about the technology behind the magic band. It's more the philosophy that Walt Disney have. Because when you start work at Walt Disney in one of the parks, the first thing they teach you is nobody at Walt Disney owns the customer. The customer owns his or her relationship with Walt Disney. They don't even talk about CRM. They talk about CMR, customer managed relationships. So when they teach people that nobody owns the customer, they also teach them at any moment somebody owns the successful outcome of that interaction. And it's your job as a Walt Disney employee to make sure that customer moment is successful. And they're also doing some very clever work with understanding how those moments add up to lifetime value, not just for the adult now, but for the child and for when the child grows up and brings his or her children back to Walt Disney. So they're trying to put metrics on these customer moments that tie them back to the business proposition. Another thing that people have to focus on, as we mentioned, is identity resolution. So my example here is Pizza Hut in Asia. And as you might imagine, the fast food, actually I can't say fast food, I have to say the quick service industry. The quick service industry in Asia is very different than Europe or in America because you walk outside and literally there are thousands of options in front of you. So Pizza Hut still do segmentation, where they put billboards near universities with a phone number where you can call for pizza. But they also have begun to recognize customers as individuals. They have taken their segmentation and put it on steroids. They now have, in South Korea, 17,000 microsegments. And then on top of each of those 17,000 microsegments, they personalize for the individual through the mobile app. Understanding what does that person buy, when does that person buy, when is there an opportunity for upsell, if they normally buy on a Friday night on the train, how do I make that easier for them with a delivery or a pickup or whatever the case may be. So they've taken their segmentation and moved it along the way to being able to identify the customers as individuals. Let's look now at the intelligence that you will capture during the customer journey. So we mentioned that your campaigns are not dead, but they need to evolve. Well, here's an example from Cabela's in the United States. And Cabela's is now owned by Bass Pro Shops. And you may not be familiar with this brand, but it's an outdoor brand. They sell hunting and fishing and camping equipment. Cabela's started in the 1950s. It was an old guy in Nebraska who was hand tying fishing lures and selling them by post. And when that business was sold last year to Bass Pro Shops, it was worth $4 billion. So from tying fishing lures to $4 billion, quite a journey for the company. Cabela's wins all kinds of advertising awards in the US because they have these massive stores out west. where people will drive 100 miles to go to a store in Wyoming or Montana. So they do these ads, and you can see it's this old guy with his dog, and it's sunrise, and he's going out to fish or hunt, and it's a very emotional thing. But that doesn't work as well in the digital world. Because people were driving so far to get to the stores, they realized that they would go online first. So how do you recreate this destination feel of a big store online? Well, they did that using a lot of customer data, but then what they did in the stores is they put in these kiosks. So when you walk into the store, you can go back to your browsing session, but now there are pointers to where you can find things in the store that you might be looking for. Cabela's also doesn't just sell the products. They sell the experiences. So they have camping courses or camping excursions. They also have cooking experiences. And when you sign up for these, you sign up on the national website. But obviously you show up in person to enjoy your experience. So connecting the dots across that customer journey and capturing the data to ensure that when you show up, you continue that experience and that it's seamless becomes really important. What they did with their data is they realized that they had their marketing database and they had their data warehouse that was keeping all the transaction data. They dumped all of that into what they call a sandbox, and they let their marketing people play in the sandbox so that they can better understand the customer journeys, how they evolve, what happens, what goes right, what goes wrong, so that they can make improvements on that. Another thing that we have to focus on is ensuring that those interactions are distributed across the customer touch points, where the customer prefers to see the message. So I'll give you an example here of Nivea, or Nivea if you prefer, because the example that I'm going to give you is from Brazil. And Nivea did an interesting experiment a few years ago, and then they repeated it last year before the Olympics. They have run this campaign for years on their sun cream, which has the slogan, "Protect Our Children." And it's all about sun cream for children. It's SPF 50 so that the little ones don't get sunburned. Well, what they did is in women's magazines, instead of putting a free sample, they put a band. If you look closely here, you can see that that is a perforated piece of paper, and it peels off, and there's a chip inside. So it is a paper version of Disney's Magic Band. They call it the Sun Band. So if you're reading the magazine while you're at Copacabana Beach, you pull off the piece of paper, you put it around your child's wrist, you download the mobile app, and now you have a proximity app. So if your child wanders too far away on a crowded beach, your phone beeps, and you'll know where your child is because it gives you the direction that you should look. So they've taken that advertising slogan of "Protect Our Children" and brought it into the physical world off of the advertising world. They've also now managed to make that connection between advertising and the actual experience. Before, they might not have known who was looking at their ads in a magazine. Now, because the person is going to pull off this piece of paper and download a mobile app, they know exactly who's seen the advertising. This is something that's being experimented with in various ways. In the UK, if you're into the Premier League, if you're reading a newspaper about last night's match, you can hover your mobile, if you have the app, over the article, and it'll play back the highlights of the game for you, and you can see the goals being scored. And again, it's a way of tying print to the digital, to the physical world. Interaction distribution. And then finally, the last example is doing this on a continuous basis. So again, you don't want to do it just once, you want to do it over and over. If you get it right, instead of pushing your messages at the customer, you'll get them to start pulling information from you. So my example here is Columbia, the sportswear company. And Columbia sells lots of outdoor clothing, especially coats, but also hiking boots and that kind of thing. Columbia does great ads. And here you can see if you buy this beautiful down jacket, you might be able to win an adventure trip of a lifetime. But Columbia did something interesting a couple of years ago. They created an app for knot tying. So if you download the app, and I have the app because I'm an old Boy Scout, so you download this app and it will give you directions for tying different kinds of knots. So if you're looking for something to help you, if you're rock climbing or sailing or fishing or tying up your tent in a windstorm, whatever the case may be, you can find the knot. And what's most interesting about this is Columbia doesn't sell rope. They're not pushing a product. They've created an app that appeals to outdoor people, people that enjoy camping, hiking, being outside. And because the kind of knots you are interested in will tell them, do you like camping? Do you like hiking? Do you like sailing? They start to build their own first-party data management platform about consumers. More importantly, every time I go to the app, they pick up more information about me. They know where I am. They might know what I'm doing. They might be able to let me know if there's a store near me. They can let me know the weather conditions where I am, or they might tell me, I can see that you're at Yellowstone National Park, and be careful, there's going to be snow at high elevations. They can start to provide information that means I go to them instead of them pushing their products at me all of the time. So an interesting example, I think. So if you're going to embrace any of these and become more customer obsessed, what I think all of these examples have in common is, first of all, they are customer-led, customer-focused, customer-obsessed. They are driven by data and insights, and they are trying to get us to more of a real-time interaction with the client so that it's more connected and it's a bit of a faster experience. If you look to the right, you can see that a lot of those capabilities are driven by technology, but technology is only in itself one part of the equation. You also need to think about your organizational structure and the culture of the company, defining your strategy, developing the people, putting your processes in place, and putting the right metrics into place. So we really do view that technology is only one part of the bigger picture when you're trying to do this. An example of that is Shop Direct in the UK, where they've aligned their systems of insight and their systems of engagement, but they've also brought in the people aspects. And I spent some time talking to the head of data science for Shop Direct. And if you don't know them, they manage multiple online brands. So old catalog businesses that have now become e-commerce businesses. Everything from clothing to electronics to furniture and home furnishings. So lots of different brands that they manage. And the head of data science told me that he had 3 real struggles, and it took years for them to get to a point where they think they're aligned. The first struggle was that they didn't have the right metrics to prove the value to the executive team. So every year, he would have to fight for budget depending on whether it had been a good year or a bad year. Basically, the Christmas shopping season would make or break his budget for the next year. And only when he was able to tie what they were doing to some business metrics could he get to a point where his budget was guaranteed every year and he didn't have to fight for it. The second thing that he struggled with was not just the executive team, but other people in the organization. Too many people wanted to say, well, that's the job of data science, or that's the job of marketing, or that's the job of the e-commerce team. And he had to go on a big campaign to make sure everyone embraced what they were trying to do as an important component of the job. Another British example for you is Royal Bank of Scotland. If you have a chance, check out their personology program. They call what they're trying to do with customers personology. It's the combination of people and technology. So they've created a virtual team focused on the customer. And they have people queued up to join this virtual team, because you go there and you work for a month or maybe 3 months as part of that team to try to improve the customer experience. So everyone wants to be a personologist at the Royal Bank of Scotland. So ShopDirect did a similar thing. His third big challenge, though, was just trying to get to a point where they could take action on the insights. They were capturing all of this great data about the customer's shopping experience online and the interactions and what they clicked on, but it took a while for them to get the right processes and technology in place that would let them follow that up and take action on it while it was still meaningful for the client. So I'm going to summarize now with some tips for you. When you are looking at how to get your organization ready for some of these activities and you're investing in technology, keep in mind that no one vendor provides a complete solution. You cannot go buy a marketing platform off the shelf. You probably already knew that, but there are some big marketing cloud vendors who will try to tell you that they've got everything you need. I don't talk about any of the marketing clouds as a platform or as a stack or as a solution. I see them as portfolios, and you can buy multiple products from those vendors, but there's very good reasons to look at point solutions as well, because no one is going to be complete. So I would recommend that you start by looking at your customer. Big surprise, I know, but look at the customer and the customer needs, and then prioritize your customer data management. Look first at how you can build an environment with data and insights to understand the customer. Look at the technology that will be able to do that for you. I think Jonathan gave you some good examples of how Actito solves that problem. And if you start with the data, then you can look at the point solutions that would complement what you're trying to do. You're going to need predictive analytics, and you're going to need digital intelligence. Whether that's web analytics or tag management or social media data, you're going to need digital intelligence flowing in, and you're going to need to build some models that will help you anticipate and meet the customer need. You're then going to have to integrate, obviously, the channels and the personalization technologies for those channels, and you probably have heard a lot about self-learning or machine learning or artificial intelligence these days. I was talking with some of the Actito guys over coffee this morning about that. I think there's a lot of hype about artificial intelligence getting used for optimization, and there are people who get carried away and want to talk about bots, and bots are going to replace marketers, and it's going to be a world of machines. I wouldn't get too concerned about all of that hype. Instead, I would look at what am I trying to accomplish? Where am I trying to optimize what I'm doing for the customer? Are there some machine learning algorithms or testing that I can apply that would help me do that? And I think you'll find that there are some real available today kind of solutions that will help you when it comes to some of the optimization and personalization. And then finally, integration, and integration. So when I survey end user customers and I ask them about their priorities, 2/3 of marketers I talk to tell me that they would sacrifice a best of breed tool for a number 2 or a number 3 technology that integrates better and easier with what they already have. So you need to really look at products that are going to integrate into your environment, and you will need to look at what different people have purchased over time and start to standardize, but you will have multiple products as part of what becomes your ecosystem. There's also a lot of interest these days in trying to standardize on a reference architecture for marketing. I don't think there is such a thing. There may be in the future, but right now, I think that every marketing organization builds its own unique ecosystem that serves what it needs to do with its customers. And that will be some key strategic solutions and then some point solutions that you add into the mix. So think about integration. And when you're doing that, don't forget the people. I mentioned the people element at Shop Direct. Another example is Fairmont Raffles Hotels. And you may not be familiar with Fairmont Raffles, a Canadian/Middle Eastern company, but they were acquired by Accor about a year ago. So they're part of the Accor family now. They operate the Fairmont Hotels, the Raffles Hotels, and also Swiss Hotel. So they're now all part of the Accor family. But when I talked to the head of CRM at Fairmont Raffles, she said, we recognized a long time ago that technology is great, but it only solves about 30% of our problem. The other 70% is making sure that the people out in the hotels who are on the front lines talking to the customers every day, that those people use the technology to its full effect and get to take advantage of it when they're serving the customers. It's more difficult in their case than in most because a lot of the hotels are franchises. They're not actually owned by the brand. They operate as independent partners. So trying to get buy-in from those people on the technology decisions is difficult, but she told me it's absolutely critical, and we go out and involve those people the same as we would if they were internal employees, because we want to make sure that they're able to use the technology after it's deployed. So don't forget the human element when you're thinking about your tech. So I'll summarize with this, and then we'll take some questions. Customer context is critical. Think about it now. If you don't become customer obsessed, then your organization is likely in trouble, because I think to succeed, marketers really need to understand their customers. They need to make sure that they're being useful and creating a value exchange in all of the marketing programs, and that also extends through to sales and service and operations. When you're doing that, obviously, you're still a business. You need to make sure that you're doing it in an optimized way to get the most return from your money. And I think the only way to really do that is to focus on the customer, the customer's context, and meet the needs of the customer every time, and do that continuously over the customer life cycle. So with that, I'll thank you, and I think we have a little bit of time for questions. Thank you.
Hello, yes. Thank you, first of all. We got a question, but I don't know if you will be able to reply to it, so we will see.
I will try.
Can you give some examples of how Disney put metrics on those customer relations?
It's still a work in progress, honestly, with Disney. They are more advanced than most of the organizations I've seen in terms of trying to understand the value of every moment and how that adds up to lifetime value. And like I said, with Disney, it's a little more complicated because it's not just this lifetime, it's the next lifetime, right? They're looking at this as a multi-generational kind of commitment when they engage, because they'll probably meet a customer for the first time when that person is a small person. And then as that person grows up, if they get it right, that person will bring their children back to Disney and so forth. What I've seen that's interesting about their methodology, since they don't really have results yet, but their methodology is they think of the customer as a state machine, if that isn't lost on people. So instead of just having a customer record and appending a lot of data to a customer record that just grows and grows, they have a core understanding of the customer with a customer record. And then they have access to a lot of different data sources simultaneously. And they think of that customer profile plus everything going on around it in those interaction systems as a current state. And they really are focused on the current state and ensuring that successful outcome. And then they will roll that up to the entire journey. One of the other things that they're working on, if you work in insurance, you'll understand this one. They're applying actuarial models to the equation. So they are looking at if this interaction, this moment, plus other moments add up to a customer journey or a customer lifetime. What's the value of that to Disney in terms of revenue and profit? But also, what is the cost to be able to serve the customer on that journey? Then, where are the moments in that journey that would make a difference if I could change the outcome? So maybe there's a decision point where I would move the customer to another journey. But if I move them to the other journey, I do that considering the increased profit I might get, but also the increased cost, so I can make a good business decision as to whether it's worth it. So they're doing interesting work with trying to match up what's right for the customer in the moment, but also what's right for the business on a long-term basis. It is a work in progress. If you get a chance to talk to anyone on the CRM team at Walt Disney, I'd recommend it if you're interested in that kind of modeling.
Small, well, it's not such a small, but another question that is probably burning in everyone's head right now is GDPR is coming up, the new data privacy rules of the European Union. You guys are proposing quite a lot of, automation solutions, but to what extent will you be limited to do many of those suggestions? Yeah,
well, I think that with the changes in legislation, it comes back to your customer best practices. It's interesting for me as an American who lives in the UK, because the United States obviously doesn't care a lot about privacy, and the UK is a lot closer to America than it is to Europe, and getting closer to America every day. I much prefer what I actually see from some European technologies when it comes to being able to ensure that even if I'm audited, I'm adhering to legislation. But more importantly than the legislation, I think has the technology enabled me to do what's right with the customers? Do I have preference centers that are customer controlled, not marketer controlled? And is it easy? Do I make it easy as a brand for the customer to see what I have and how I communicate with him or her, and can they control that? Can they change that? So, with Actito and other vendors that I see, not only in this part of Europe, but especially in Germany, I see that you may well find that within your marketing automation and campaign management tools, some of the European players have a better handle on that than some of the big American firms that are competing globally.
Which makes it even more important to deliver relevant content to your customers. And that brings us seamlessly to what Tim Karpisek is going to talk about. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.